This is the Italian Citizenship Podcast, hosted by Marco Permunian and Rafael Di Furia.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Italian Citizenship Podcast presented by italiancitizenshipassistance.com. I am here with Italian attorney Marco Permunian and I am Rafael Di Furia, and we are here today to talk a little bit more in depth specifically about Italian citizenship by descent through a parent. We've spoken about Italian citizenship by descent here on this channel a number of times, and we'll be touching on this subject again, of course, in the future. But this time we wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about if you're to make a claim through a parent, because there are some peculiarities and some things in particular that people who are only going as far back as a parent may experience. So, Marco, where should we start with this one?
Just like anybody else applying for Italian citizenship, you, of course, need to prove that you are entitled to Italian citizenship by descent. And to do so, you have to collect a number of documents proving that you qualify for Italian citizenship by descent. These documents are your parents' birth certificates, or certain consulates will only require one of your parents' birth certificates. So you can choose what parent you want to make the application through, depending though on what year you were born, because if you were born prior to 1948, you cannot apply the traditional way through your mother. And if you were born before 1948 and you are applying for citizenship through your mother, make sure that you check our previous video about 1948 cases. But moving on to the next documents required for the process, one of the key documents is the naturalization certificate of the parent that you are using to apply for citizenship by descent. So if you are applying for citizenship by descent through your father, you need your father's naturalization record. You need the full records, so his petition for naturalization, his declaration of intention, if available, depending on when he became naturalized, and his certificate of naturalization. In most cases, you will need your father's cooperation to obtain his naturalization records, because the access to those documents could be restricted if the year in which your father naturalized is too recent, so within the past 20 or 30 years. And then, of course, you need your own personal vital record documents, as all the other people applying for citizenship. You need your own birth certificate, your marriage record. If you have minor children, you also need their birth certificates. And once you have all of these documents ready, so legalized and translated into Italian, you can attend your appointment with the consulate and formally apply for citizenship by descent.
So just to quickly recap, you'll need from one or both of your parents, depending on the consulate or municipality where you apply. You'll need their birth, marriage, and potentially death certificate. But if they're alive, will you need anything directly from them signing that they are okay with this, or how would that work?
That's a very good question. A lot of people ask me, do I need my parents' cooperation in the process? And as I said before, you may or may not need their cooperation to get their naturalization records. And also you may or may not need their cooperation to obtain their marriage record and their birth certificates, depending on where they were born or in what state in the US they got married, if they got married in the US. But regardless of their cooperation for these specific documents that you need to apply for citizenship, you will need their cooperation, or actually the cooperation of one of them, to being able to apply for citizenship, because your parent, the one that you're using to make the claim, will have to sign a specific document where he or she declares that he or she never renounced Italian citizenship. So this is a form that every consulate in the US requires in order for you to be able to apply for citizenship by descent.
And I'm assuming that, for example, if your parents were deceased, that they wouldn't require this document.
Correct. If your parents or the parent that you are making the claim through is no longer living, you can sign that document on his or her behalf. And by the way, that document that we're talking about is not required when you are applying for citizenship directly in Italy. So one advantage of filing the application directly in Italy, if you are, for example, estranged from your family, could be that if you are legally able to obtain all of the vital record documents needed to support your claim, you can apply for citizenship even without your parent signing this form that we have mentioned.
I know there's probably plenty of people out there who are in that type of situation, and so it's good that even they would have the option, regardless of their home family life, to be able to pursue Italian citizenship. And you were saying that there could be the situation if somebody was naturalized recently that those documents may not be public. What would a person need to do to get those more recent naturalization documents?
So if your parent became naturalized recently, you most likely have to file a request with the Department of State under the Freedom of Information Act, and that request needs to be signed by your parent under penalty of perjury in order for you to be able to obtain the naturalization documents. Or if your parent is deceased, you can sign, but you need to provide the Department of State with proof that your parent is deceased, so you need to include your parent's death certificate. And this is a process that is much different from the process that people have to go through when requesting naturalization records of their great-grandparent or grandparent, because in most cases those documents are public, so they can be accessed by the person who is applying for citizenship through a request, like a simple request to the Department of State Genealogy Department. You can actually order those documents online, but if you need the naturalization records of your parent, and if your parent became naturalized recently, then you necessarily need his or her signature, or you need their death certificates if they passed away.
And what about when you're making the request for your parents' vital documents? Are there any other peculiarities that a person might run into?
So regarding their birth certificates, some municipalities may just release the birth certificates without any formalities, but it really depends on the municipality. So there will be some municipalities that will want your parent to sign the request to get his or her birth certificate. So it kind of depends on what municipality they were born in.
So this sounds like it's very in line with many other systems here in Italy, where how things work in a specific area will very much depend on the specific municipality and also the specific clerk working there at that time.
Correct. And regarding their marriage record in the US, that really depends instead on the state where they got married, because the access to vital records is restricted in some states. So only one of the spouses can get the marriage record, whereas in some other states, the access to those vital record documents is free, so anybody can access. Or in some states, you can access those documents only if you are a family member, so if you're the child or the parent of one of the spouses.
And what if your parents got married in Italy rather than in the US?
Then the same would apply, as I was saying before, in regards to birth certificates.
What about in the situation where somebody may require a specific document, but because the document is, or the record is restricted only to the person that it's for, to be able to request it? Is there something that a person can do in that situation?
So I have a couple of clients in this situation, and unfortunately, if the laws of the state in the US where the document needs to be accessed, or in Italy, do not allow you to access that specific document, if that is a key document, you will not be able to apply for citizenship. You can try to petition the court in the US or in Italy to obtain that document and see what the court says regarding your specific request. But if you are unable to provide a key document for the application process, you will not be able to apply for citizenship. Now, one of the documents that is not required in some instances is the marriage record of your parents, because you only need the marriage record if you're going through your father, because under Italian law, your father is automatically presumed to be the person married to your mother. So if you don't have a marriage record for your parents, and if you are applying through your father, you need an acknowledgement of paternity. But if you're applying through your mother, if for some reasons the marriage record is unavailable to you, you can still apply for citizenship. The consulate is probably going to give you a hard time because you are missing a key document required by the law. But once you explain that the law requires the marriage record only to prove who is your father, then at that point you should be able to overcome the missing marriage certificate issue.
And this is actually a very good point that you've raised, is that it's very important to be versed on the basic minimums of what is required and the laws in some respects, especially if you are in a particular situation where you may be missing something or you may have to argue a certain point, because very often the consulate clerks and municipality clerks will be operating under their understanding and personal interpretation of the laws rather than one blanket law that applies to everybody. It's very often based on their specific interpretation. So if you know what the laws are, if you know the specific situation, then in many cases, it's not uncommon, even in my own case, I had to sit there and explain certain things to them. Of course, you have to do it very nicely. You want to present the information in a friendly manner, but it's not uncommon for a person to have to explain part of how the system is supposed to work. I had to explain a specific, like how something is actually recognized in the book. Like, I knew it off the top of my head. The clerk at the consulate didn't agree with that, and I asked, I requested, would you mind confirming this information, as the information available even on your own website would contradict what you're saying. So she did go back. She looked in her documentation, whatever she had to look through, or she spoke to her boss, or however it went, and did come out that my understanding was correct. And there are going to be times where your understanding may be incorrect. So you also want to be very careful of how you approach the situation. So regardless of the situation, though, even if you're not in a peculiar situation, it's not the worst to know what the laws are and what your rights are.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
And I think also, just one last thing to add to that, is it's very important to know what your basic rights are, because even if you're not formally recognized as an Italian, you still are recognized in some manner as an Italian, and even in Italian law. If a person goes into an Italian office and they claim that they're an Italian citizen, the burden of proof to some extent ends up falling on the person you're making the claim to. You have to be able to show that proof yourself. Like, you have to be able to provide that. So if you can't provide that, then okay, there can only assume that you're not an Italian citizen. But if you go into an Italian office making that claim, then they have to treat you in that way until they can't show whether you are or are not a citizen.
And not only people should be aware of the law, but also of the system that is in place. For example, if you live within the Los Angeles consular jurisdiction and you are applying for citizenship through a parent, the consulate allows you to attend an early appointment. So as everybody knows, the wait time for an appointment for citizenship by descent at the Los Angeles consulate is very, very long. But if you are a first-generation case, the consulate allows you to apply and to file your citizenship application much sooner than the other people.
I just have to say that almost sounds quite unusual. Is that even legal under Italian law? Because I know everybody has to be treated equally when it comes to this sort of thing.
Well, that's a good question. They do it, so people who are in these situations are happy about it.
So it's legal enough.
Exactly.
And just because we're specifically focusing on applying through an Italian parent rather than grandparent or so on, what other peculiarities might a person face if they're going through a parent specifically?
A lot of people contact me and they believe that they don't qualify for Italian citizenship by descent because both of their parents became naturalized before they were born. I must say that while in most cases that is correct, in some cases you could still qualify for Italian citizenship even if both of your parents became naturalized before you were born. I'm specifically referring to those people who have an Italian mother who became naturalized before she got married. If her husband at the time of the marriage was still an Italian citizen, then she would have gotten back her Italian citizenship via the marriage, even if she wasn't aware of that, as long as the marriage took place before 1983. So in short, if your Italian mother became naturalized and then she got married to your Italian father, who was still an Italian citizen and not an American citizen, your mother would have gained her Italian citizenship back without even knowing that, as long as the marriage was celebrated before 1983. Then it doesn't matter that your father became naturalized after the marriage, because that would not have caused any change in your mother's citizenship status. So in that situation, you can apply for citizenship by descent through your mother, because your mother was an Italian citizen when you were born, because she had reacquired her Italian citizenship through the marriage to her husband.
Just by default.
Exactly. And the good thing is that your mother can also apply for recognition of her Italian citizenship, and that's something that normally mothers don't even know. So I generally say to all my clients, you should probably see if your mother is also interested in claiming her Italian citizenship, because she is actually still an Italian citizen because she became an Italian citizen again through the marriage.
And I know you've, even when we've spoken in the past, you've told me about a story of a family where the father had naturalized. He was the Italian-born ancestor, but the mother was not Italian. But because they got married before the 80s, that she automatically became an Italian citizen, and therefore her children could get Italian citizenship through her, even though she never knew she was an Italian citizen.
That's a very good example, another situation that is very common.
But what about in the situation where a person's parents married after 1983, and so that person wouldn't be able to get their Italian citizenship through their mother? What would happen if their parents did naturalize as the citizen of another nation, and then at a later date reacquired it? How would that affect their child, or the petitioner in this case?
That's a question that I'm asked a lot of times. So what if my parents became naturalized before I was born, but then regained their Italian citizenship? And the answer is, if your parents regained their Italian citizenship when you were over 18, then you wouldn't qualify for Italian citizenship by descent, because the fact that they reacquired Italian citizenship doesn't change the fact that they were not Italian citizens when you were born, or no longer Italian citizens, because the reacquisition of citizenship doesn't operate retroactively. If instead you were under 18 when they regained their Italian citizenship, then you would have become an Italian citizen too when your parents became Italian citizens again. Of course, if your parents, though, became US citizens after 1992, they wouldn't have lost their Italian citizenship, because in 1992, Italy started to allow dual citizenship. So the acquisition of a foreign citizenship didn't cause the loss of Italian citizenship anymore. And as far as the peculiarities go about citizenship through parents, I think we've covered it all for now.
All right, so then I think that sounds like it's a good time to wrap up this episode of the Italian Citizenship Podcast, presented by italiancitizenshipassistance.com. Thank you for joining us for another episode of this video podcast. And if you have any questions about anything that we've spoken about in this episode or any of the other episodes that we've done thus far, feel free to leave it down in the comment section below, and we may be able to get to it in a future video. Of course, this is Marco Permunian, Italian attorney, and I am Rafael Di Furia, and we will see you all next time.